listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening Radio with Julia Griffin. To master a higher frequency for a new state of mind. Once you walked in a forest of splendor in which everything you did and everything you thought was aligned. It is possible at this time to begin to return to the old knowledge. Intuitive healer and manifestor Julia Griffin is here to talk about this unique time in history when all sentient beings, animals, plants, trees, and the earth are intent on creating this change. The wolves awakened her to the most incredible light, which opened gifts and brought knowledge that she longs to share. You are creators, and you are born to be creators of beauty, possibility, and joy. Join Julia on a journey into a beautiful and magical world where amazing possibilities exist. Let us help open the door. The Power of Inspiration and Awakening with Julia Griffin starts right now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Julia Griffin, and you're listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour, and let us help you raise your vibration, which always happens when you're hearing spiritual things or contemplating philosophical thought that you haven't embraced before. And that helps us move into a new state of mind. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I awakened with real live wolves. When I met a wolf, it talked to me just as people talk. And they taught me to read the energy of the heart or the soul. So I can intuitively hear plants, animals, and people. And as a result, I became an intuitive healer. I do readings of people's souls and help them get their lives on that path. And a writer as a result. You can find me at onetrueself.com. So let me tell you about today's guest, Penelope Holt. She's written a fascinating book, but I'm going to tell you about her first, and then we'll go to the book. So she was born and educated. She was born in New York and educated in England. She lives in New York. She's a novelist, playwright, business writer, and marketing executive whose work has been performed at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, York Arts Center, and New York's American Folk Theater. In addition to writing her new fiction, The Angel Scroll and The Apple, The Apple was based on the controversial Herman Rosenblatt, which was a Holocaust romance. She is a prolific writer, editor, and co-author of nonfiction, including Singing God's Word, The Story of the Harlem Gospel Choir, that must be interesting, Emotional Intelligence at Work, and many other works. The Angel Scrolls is a great book. I read it, then I went back and read more. When I get a book to read, it's normally in PDF, and I got halfway through it, and I thought, no, I'm going to go buy it and put it on Kindle because I want to take my time and go back and read it. So it is that good. So in The Angel Scroll, our author transports readers on a thrilling hunt for 3 miraculous paintings that are destined to usher in spiritual enlightenment. She combines romance and mystery, I would say, with adventure to find sacred artifacts in a story that expresses ancient truths, modern world, and the spiritual space between. So welcome, Penelope. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I'm looking forward to our chat. I know it's going to be good.
Good. So what made you decide to write this? It's a pretty complex book with a lot of different spiritual information.
Well, I've been very interested in different spiritual paths since I was a child. I started at the age of 4 with the Salvation Army, could hear all the tambourines singing. And I said, as we walked past a little wooden hut, and I said to my mum, I want to go there, take me there. And then I did, went to Sunday school there, and then I became baptized as a Catholic, and then I got into Buddhism. So I've always just been fascinated by how people find God or their understanding of God. So over the years, I've just done lots and lots of research, found some really interesting fringe theories, ideas that are not so much in the mainstream, like Jesus was an Essene who maybe traveled to India, they believe. Essenes were influenced by Hinduism and the Egyptian mysteries, and then Glastonbury Tor, which is the home of the Celtic Druids. that Joseph of Arimathea allegedly came and evangelized and brought Christianity. And then, the great Catholic mystic, Saint Catherine of Siena, and of course Rome, and all of the amazing works of art and artifacts that they have there. So bottom line is, people have heard me say, I love the Da Vinci Code. I thought it was a great idea for a book, this scavenger hunt for spiritual artifacts. So I thought I'd like to take some of the artifacts and theories that I've researched and weave them into this book, really about a seeker. The heroine Claire is widowed, and her seeking journey begins when she's bereaved, which often happens for people. That's when they begin asking those bigger questions. And then her partner is also bereaved. So now we have two people who have lost loved ones making their way in the world, navigating new romance. And then just put in good versus evil, which is always good for a plot. And so it's just an amalgam of I do so much writing for other people and have to be of service to them, that I just wanted this book to be all about the stuff that I love, and the book that I would love to not only write but read.
Right. And I'll say a few things that have to do with general religion. At some point, if you go deep enough into your spirituality, you really start studying everything. And you start to see that what they're really talking about is what I would call a universal energy or power.
Yeah.
I even call it sometimes in my own mind the uni, because it's in union with us when it changes our lives. And it's so much broader than what we tend to recognize it as in one religion, because it's in everything. It's in plants, it's in animals, it's in our heart. But everybody has a different way of portraying it. And I think that there are specific truths in almost every religion or philosophy.
Yeah, that's why I have some really nice episodes with, I think Buddhism really expresses that beautifully. The idea that the ground of our being is the ground is what we all arise from in consciousness. And you have a very strong sense of that unity. There's also, an anthropologist in there who's interested in goddess worship.
Right.
Because and the great goddess and archetypal shamanistic energies. Shamans believe that you change reality. And I know this is your life's work. You change your reality by what you choose to believe and think. And a good shaman changes somebody else's circumstances and life by inviting them to believe more healing, holistic, grounded, unity principles. Because when we're divided and we're in the dark, we're divided from the ground of being. That's when we have that negativity, that depression, that darkness. And so a good shaman will bring you back into that unified state.
I think, and people don't usually talk about this, but a shaman, a healer, they are people who have learned to stay in a higher energy field. And part of the healing is letting the person feel what that energy feels like so that they can align with it. And that's partially how the healing comes through. No matter who it is, if it's Jesus, a shaman, a Buddhist, it doesn't matter. But it's being embraced by that energy field that comes from the universe.
Yeah, I'm always impressed when people can stay there consistently and model that for others. I can get into those states. It's difficult to stay there. You have to sort of play with your mind to get back in. And, before we came on camera, you and I were talking about asking those questions, just getting out of your thinking ruts and understanding when you're in a particular state of mind. What's the question that I have to ask? What do I have to reach for to get to a new place, rather than just cycling back and going to the old place?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really where our characters start,
Yeah.
is they're stuck in an old place that they don't know how to get out of. And she does this marvelous painting that has two qualities. It's warm and it heals. And she goes from not being well known to everyone wanting her painting. And that's how she meets Richard. He sees her painting, he sees her skill. So I would also say that that's a part of spiritual growth, is when other people start to recognize where you are. They may know more where you are than you know, but you feel that growth comes with it. And I sort of thought they both gave that to one another.
Yeah, they did. And of course, he's aware of the angel scroll prophecy, which predicts these three paintings, that they will be a visual gospel. Because George Gurdjieff, the great Russian mystic,
Right.
believed that, as many people do, that great works of art, not just people messing about with a paintbrush, that they are divinely inspired. You have that beautiful Sistine Chapel of God reaching out to Adam and breathing life into him. And that there's so much of sacred geometry in great art, which of course triggers the unconscious, because sacred geometry and those symbols are sort of the archetypal principles of our psyche, of the universe, and how the language of the universe. And you have that more directly in art than words are powerful. I'm a writer. In the beginning was the word. But there's something soul opening when you look at an amazing work of art. And that was the miracle that I wanted for the book, that people, when the three paintings are gathered together, they're warm and they're healing individually, but when they're combined into a triptych, they'll cause this miraculous transformation. You will literally just look at it and it will penetrate you, and there will be an immediate, spiritual transformation. So I just love that idea. And so Richard knows, he believes that hers is one of those paintings. He has to convince her because she's just in her bubble of grief and she can't make sense of it. And then they start this trek across the globe, Europe, going to these sacred places to find the other two paintings, to see if in fact, when they put them together, they will be miraculous.
Right. So let's start with the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls. What would you like to tell our listeners about that?
That was one of the sort of inspirations in the beginning. I'd always been fascinated by the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think whenever we unearth these amazing artifacts that give us this view into a different time and place. So the originals were found in around the Dead Sea between 1947 and 56, thousands of pieces of kind of deteriorating text, some full pieces, had the earliest Jewish Bible, Mosaic law. They were just an incredible find linguistically for scholars, for the culture, for religion, for rabbinic studies. But then in 1999, they thought they found another one that somehow got lost or missing. And they pursued it for a long time. They, scholars, it was written up in the media, in the Jerusalem Post, in AP. They really believed it was real. They'd seen drawings of it, but they could never pin it down. They could never say for certain that it existed because they saw the real parchment. And so they sort of gave up on it. But at that point, I was so captivated by it because it was 1999. And
Right.
remember Y2K and the Mayan calendars and everything is going to go kerflooey. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if it's a prophecy for the 21st century and something very powerful happening. So I kind of took the idea away. And then I just used the idea of the scroll to, to come up with a prophecy. I thought it was nice to tie it to existing artifacts that people knew in existed.
That are tangible. Yeah. And I've read a lot of books about it, but it never really told me a whole lot, except just they think this and they think that.
Yeah, I'm babysitting my daughter's dog, and she's joining in our conversation. So
that's fine. So I think we go from there, and then I think it's okay to tell the early part of the book, but not the end of the book. So the angel scroll is stolen, and they're looking for the other two paintings. So they go on a quest and they start traveling. And the next part that they go into would be more of the feminine lore. So why don't you tell us the role that the feminine plays in this?
Well, the Druids, the Celtic people have heard of Stonehenge in England, the great stone. It's a solar, almost like a solar temple. And the Druids were early Celtic peoples, and the Druids were their priests. And we don't know a lot about them because they had an oral tradition, so it's really come down through folklore. But they believed in many deities. They were polytheistic, but they had a great, great reverence for the goddess and fertility and everything that the goddess implies that we sort of lose in modern societies. We become more technological and intellectual. We can lose those deep, what they call chthonic, earthy, fertility, psychic, just that feminine way of being and knowing. And
they had a tree language and they had poets.
Yes. And they, you know, Claire finds out she gets a tour of Glastonbury tour, which is sort of ground zero for goddess worship. They actually carved terraces. They carved the goddess into the landscape, so that she was sort of present in there, and they had these rites. And she discovers I'm very interested in sacred geometry, and Claire is having her visions through what looks like the third eye, that eye shape, which is actually known as the vesica piscis. It is a powerful symbol of sacred geometry. And if you, it's where two is
do it for us.
oh, thank you, because I'm always trying to describe it. So you see those two circles intersecting, and they make that almond eye shaped. And that intersection is what's powerful. That is the intersection of above and below, of conscious and unconscious.
Yin and yang.
And it actually looks like a womb. It looks like a vulva, because we give birth to the immaterial, the psychic, the immaterial becomes material through birth, through the
well, it's how we create, is by putting the two sides of ourselves together. You know, it starts with one circle, which is how we perceive ourselves. And if you keep going into the direction of your higher self or your inner self or your heart, you very quickly see there's another part of you that wants to go in the other direction. But as you recognize it and you stop going with those thoughts and emotions, which your characters do that in the book, you start to put the two sides of the self together. And then that brings conception of a new self or a new idea. And if we're following Drumbelow, Melchizedek, it eventually goes into the flower of life, which is the beautiful thing that you've created goes out to the world.
Yeah. And so through Josie, who's the anthropologist, we are able to bring in the feminine, because there's a lot of reference. She understands archetypal energy as being the sort of psychic blueprint. We have all of these archetypal blueprints, and we become, you know, we have a little of each. We can have a pure archetype, or we can have a blend. But the Virgin Mary, the Madonna, and the power of that archetype is, I bring her into the book. She was Christ's mother. She gave the immaterial became material. Heaven was combined with earth, and it happened through the womb of Mary. And so, and that ties back to the goddess, you know, in Catholicism, for all of its faults, there's a very, very powerful invocation of the mother, of the Madonna, and all that implies. And I think when people think about just look at that vesica piscis, it has an immediate impact on your unconscious. There's something about it triggers deep especially in a woman, a deep understanding of that, the power of creation. And someone actually asked me, did I think we were all psychic? And I just said, well, a woman your body is so intelligent, your consciousness is so intelligent, it can actually create a human being. And as far as I'm concerned, if your body is that smart, it can do pretty much anything. So asking if someone is telepathic or psychic, or they have extrasensory, you're capable of having extrasensory perceptions or gifts, is kind of a nonsense question to me. You're asking a woman who can actually create a human being while she's shopping for groceries, if psychic ability is possible. So that's the way I always answer it, because I think we forget the miracle of the human body and the intelligence that is in there, driven.
Or the intelligence of nature, where everything goes along the Fibonacci spiral. And once you start meditating outside enough, if you think a higher thought, the trees respond, the birds come down, the deer come out of the woods. It's all super psychic world if you step deeply enough into it.
Yeah, I was very I did not know about you that you're tied to the wolf, because a number of years ago, I began to have really powerful wolf dreams, vivid and euphoric. I actually dreamt that I was a wolf, and I was charging through a snowy wood, and something was chasing me, and I came to a high cliff, high, and I leapt from the cliff. And in the dream, I thought, this is almost certain death, because it was just so high. But I landed on the other side and kept running. It's one of the most amazing and powerful.
That's a wolf dream. When I lived with them, I had dreams like that almost every night.
Yeah. And I asked my kids, Mother's Day was coming up, And they said, what do you want for Mother's Day? And I just said, I want a wolf ring. And they bought me a silver ring that had a wolf's face on it.
Well, it's probably one of your power animals,
yeah,
like your totem animal.
Yeah, and I keep trying to learn more if you can direct me to a book, because when I come across a symbology like that, I like to connect the dots and understand deeply what it really means, because it shows up as an animal, it shows up as an energy, shows up as a psychic force, it shows up in Native American law, dreams, and I've never really kind of put it all together in a way that I would like to.
I found that there were really good books that were written about wolves as far as their life. Like I think they have a 30 to a 60-mile territory, things like that. The fathers will actually, they really do regurgitate food for the babies and take care of them, things like that. But who the wolves are, I think, is so misaligned in our mythology. The first thing that they showed me, and this may be coming from another solar system, I don't know, but was that we came on a wave of light with the wolves to our planet, and they were supposed to walk beside us. But they say we forgot our power, we forgot how to create things, and they're here howling and singing songs with the whales and the dolphins, which they call the song of creation, so that we can remember how to create again. That's their purpose here.
And I know there was a book, I don't know how the true depth of it or how correct it was, but there was a book some years back called Women Who Run with the Wolves. So there's sort of a connection between the wolf and the feminine, right?
Oh, definitely. They have a matriarchal society. There's always an alpha wolf, and she tells everyone what to do. They all obey her.
Yeah.
Which is really true with a lot of animals, that an alpha controls the group.
Yeah. Well,
Just
in the angel scroll, you know that the light is sort of the medium through which everything happens. You know, the visions appear out of light, the paintings appear out of light. The paintings are radiate light. You know, the idea that light it condenses into matter, but ultimately all light. And
it's a catalyst for spirituality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you certainly have a lot of that in your book. Your characters are so interesting. Why don't you tell us about some of the characters that you put in besides our main two characters?
Well, I think in excuse me, in the 21st century, I always maintain that people have a God-sized hole in their life, whatever that higher power-sized hole. Voltaire said, if God didn't exist, we'd have to invent him, which is kind of an intriguing statement. So Claire is like a modern seeker. Bereavement kicks off her journey, and she gets pulled in. She's seeing visions. She's painted. She's channeled a masterpiece. She's missing her husband desperately. Things are happening. She just doesn't understand. She has a spiritual emergency. And so I wanted her to meet characters who would give her a different interpretation, an explanation of her experiences, because that's what happens in life. You were saying, you were talking about the unity, the perennial wisdom that underlies all spiritual traditions, you know, one view, different windows. But nevertheless, we encounter different sort of manifestations of spirituality. And so she meets a Buddhist monk, a Benedictine, who's in Jerusalem translating the scroll and really, really believes in, this is someone you were talking about who lives in that space of higher vibration. He believes in prophecy. He believes in miracles, believes in the divine. He's looking for it all the time. He's finding it all the time. So she meets him, and then she meets a Buddhist monk who explains to her that there's no dogma in Buddhism. It's really because she's doesn't want to be force-fed anything. She doesn't, you know, Father Karl Brand is the Benedictine. He's sort of force-feeding her the prophecy a little bit. Whereas the Bodhipaksha, the monk, just says everything's a play of your mind. You know, it's sort of personal experience. So, and then she meets her doctor, thinks that she has a physical problem. She does have some health problems, and this is why she's having visions. So he's a materialist, typical non-spiritual materialist, tries to put it all down to the physical. And then, of course, she meets Josie, who's this anthropologist and who studies really ancient faith, polytheistic, which is where we kind of have to go back to get to the feminine and the great goddess. So
and our connection with nature, because
and
all the
nature.
indigenous religions were essentially destroyed by Christianity and exploration of the world.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I don't know if you noticed, but, and I don't want to give too much away, but
I know.
before Claire paints this masterpiece, which is, imagine a Rembrandt. It's that magnificent of a painting that she's channeled as part of this prophecy. But before her natural style of painting, she paints nature.
Right.
She paints landscape. She paints nature, and she returns to painting nature. So even in her artistic effort, and she feels that her paintings of nature are not as valuable. In fact, the book starts with her agent saying, she says, sell the other paintings, sell the nature based. She's like, they don't want them,
I know.
they're not valued. And so her finding her value through the book, actually she finds the value and she gets the recognition for the nature that she paints. So that was just like a little sub. If you go back and read the book, I like to go back and read a book and that I really love, and then find little things that I missed the first go around.
I know, because it was exciting. I didn't read it as carefully the first time. So I reread about the first 80 pages, but that's as far as I got. So there will still be more of it. You definitely want to buy this book. It's multi-layered. It's a wonderful adventure. And it is, I think it gives you an overlay of lots of aspects of spirituality.
Yeah, and it gives you permission to seek, to be curious, to ask questions. Some people don't like this Jesus in India theory. Was on a radio show, and I think it was a Christian evangelical thought that it was heresy, that, Jesus didn't know. He had these missing years, hidden years from age 12 to 30. But it's written about, there's scholars, there's documentation, it's widely held. Through Moses, who was who led the Hebrews out of Egypt and slavery.
Right.
He was actually the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. So he was trained in the Egyptian mysteries and Hinduism. So it's only natural that he would bring those influences into early Judaism.
Yes, because it's all the same.
It's all the same. It all came on a lightweight.
Yeah.
The wolf.
Yeah. So, I mean, and all these things, if you dig deeply enough, there are so many mystical and esoteric mysteries. And I know in the beginning, I thought, oh, all these things are so different. How will I ever learn this? What was I reading? The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And I think it's forever a book to read in tiny print. It took about 2 years for me to read all of it 2 or 3 times. I suddenly realized they're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once you see it, you start to see it everywhere. So it's time for us to go to break. I'm talking with Penelope Holt about her wonderful new book and thriller, The Angel Scroll. We'll be right back with more. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Griffin, and I'm talking with Penelope Holt about her mystical romantic thriller, The Angel Scroll. One thing that you're going to find in this book is that there's a great deal of metaphysics from many different angles. So we're going to talk about that for part of the next half hour. Stay with us, learn more, and get up to that higher vibration. So Penelope, where would you like to start with metaphysics?
Just that in the Western Enlightenment, the church really forbids scientists to study psyche and soul. It was, it began with Copernicus and not being allowed to say that the earth revolved around the sun. It was heresy. And so I think few people realize that this important divide was created where the church was the custodian of the soul or the psyche, and then the materialists could concentrate on the physical world. And that's why the principle of science now is that science will only study what is observable in nature empirically. They will not allow for supernatural forces. And so if you can't see a God, you can't measure a God, and therefore there is no God.
Right.
And so it's when you think about how stunningly lacking that is, it's whereas that didn't happen in the East. The soul was not amputated from the physical inquiry, and that's why the Buddhists have a really, really excellent study of mind and mind training. And the mind and consciousness is both a physical and a metaphysical thing. So
Or the
modern
Hindu healing through physical yoga.
and Ayurveda medicine, and
Right.
just understanding of everything being one in nature, and balancing your body holistically, and the energy that is in certain physical materials.
We're
But
back to this. It's
back to that,
balancing the yin and yang, the both sides of the self.
because everything that is physical has an energetic principle or quality within it. And so when we're taking certain foods, we're actually ingesting different levels of energy that we need energetically for our bodies. And so the Eastern, very tickety-boo. This is very tickety-boo there. It's very well understood. It's very well organized. It's nice to see that in the West, that new philosophers and scientists like Bernardo Kastrup and Donald Hoffman and Stephen C. Meyer, who is a philosopher of science, and he is kind of an intelligent design guy. He's a scientist who believes in intelligent design. Stephen Meyer, he says, just look at the genome, the DNA. It's programmed. It's literally been programmed. It's programmed information that gives the instructions to create your body, these trillions of cells, to organize them, the proteins. And he says, wherever there's programming, there is a programmer. Where there is intelligent design, there is a designer. And then he just asks the basic questions that to science, if you believe in the Big Bang and this massive explosion of this heat and this plasma that eventually condensed, where did the chemicals come for life? Where did the chemicals come for proteins and amino acids and all of the chemistry
that's a wonderful question, because my mother was a scientist, and they can make seawater that is identical to the ocean, but nothing will live in it. Yeah.
So it's just that it's a big, I'm open to the answer. If you want to tell me how red hot plasma, if you take a look at the sun, there's these magnificent shots of the sun with this plasma and these like it's just this, the heat and the this white hot plasma, the gases, how they sort of turned
how we ended up. We've done a lot to it, but the Earth is an amazing planet. Look at all it has: mountains, oceans, trees, all this water. Because I know in some of my research, one of the things that I know is that there are very few planets that are a water planet.
Yeah.
And if we go more deeply into metaphysics, emotion is water.
Yeah.
And
consciousness is water too.
Yeah, right. So on the higher vibrations, water becomes love, because that is the highest emotion, the cosmic sea of love.
Yeah.
So how did they figure out something so complicated and put it all together in a planet? I don't know.
And I'm not being sort of dogmatic about it. I just think that Stephen Meyer asks a very interesting question. How do you go from the elements, these, sort of gross elements, into life sciences? And so I had another point and it completely, Claire, just about talking about the unconscious. Something that when I was getting very interested in Buddhism, I studied dream yoga, how you can stay awake during your dreaming, right? And some people are naturally what we call lucid dreamers. They are awake during their dreams. They can guide their dreams. And so Josie suggests to Claire, again, the Vesicabiscus, the upper and the lower, that, the Buddhists believe that waking life is just a more stable waking dream. It's sort of
well, it's a dream that we're accustomed to.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I've really found, is that whatever we're accustomed to, somehow or other we manage to dream it up again the next day.
Yeah. And we have a consensual, as human beings, with our perceptions. You and I agree that this is a cup and this is a table, and I'm in
Right.
your dream, you're in my dream. And Josie says to Claire, but when you sleep at night, your dreams get trippier, right? More stuff is emerging from the unconscious. Of course, it's all emerging from the unconscious, but during the day, the liminal, that threshold, we control, the ego controls what can come through, and we organize it into.
We have a filter that's
Yes,
based on the good and the bad parts of our lives, basically.
yeah. And you got, Carl Jung was very fascinated because he devoted his life. In fact, his red book was published a bunch of years ago. This was his personal journal with these amazing illuminated inks, his active imagination. He would paint serpents. I mean, there's every kind of symbolic animal. You would love it. You got to go get the red book.
Okay.
He wrote.
I've wanted it for a long time, and you just reminded me.
Well, it was very expensive, and it was at a museum in New York, and I just couldn't. I kept going back. I couldn't let myself have it. Anyway, my husband bought it for me for Christmas that year, and so Carl Jung worked very hard to go deep into. He said it was like a jungle. Like your unconscious is like a jungle. You'll find things there. You'll find archetypal, powerful images and symbology. And then he started getting into the synchronicities. He was trying to loosen the floor of his ego that keeps everything down, and allow, the famous story of the scarab beetle appearing on the windowsill with the woman. When you allow, it's what we were saying earlier about being open. Let something more come out of your unconscious. Don't just batten everything down and live in this conventional, boxed in, things happen what you expect to happen, right? Because
and that's exactly what happened to Claire. She'd been sitting in her apartment feeling depressed, worrying about her future. And then someone says, your painting is great. And then she goes on this whole adventure, both in consciousness and throughout geographical locations.
Yeah. And like you said, it takes somebody else to see her through their eyes and communicate. Robert Bly said that neurosis is actually, it's the creative unconscious trying to find expression. And we get depressed and neurotic when we, when we try and resist it.
Right.
And I know that modern psychiatry, I believe I had read, they used to refer to schizophrenics as crazy. And now they just believe that, their threshold of their ego is just not as firm. And there's more unconscious, they have auditory hallucination, they have visual hallucinations. If you remember the beautiful movie, The Beautiful Mind, one of my favorite films with Russell Crowe about the great mathematician, John Nash, who was a schizophrenic, and probably his genius was tied to that. Right. And how he literally could not distinguish between illusion, delusion. He was seeing people in the real world, and he tried to figure out, are they real or are they just a part of my unconscious? So I'm just very fascinated by that, how some people, more stuff breaks through their unconscious. Probably great, what's his name? Cut off his ear, great painter.
Right, Van Gogh,
great musicians. How much of that are these eruptions coming from the unconscious that they're sort of trying to tame? And that's what happens to Claire when she's painting her painting.
Right.
All the painters, the 3 painters in the book, it's like this energy is coming through them like wild horses, and they're trying to sort of just steer it through the fingers and the brush and the bristles of the brush to get this power onto the canvas. So I know
I will say this about visions. I think if you want, I've always had them since I was a child. Unfortunately, they were mainly prophetic as a child. So I asked for that to go away, and it did. But I do see a whole lot of things that most people can't see in the unseen world. But I've meditated a lot, and I've kept a fairly stable life so that I can stay even and harmonious while I have these experiences. And I do think that's important.
That's what Claire is looking for too, because she's so off balance.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't know how to integrate what's happening into just her very regular routinized life. And how do you make room for something like that? I've had a friend, my daughter's godmother is a psychic. She when she was 5 years old, she saw her grandfather being stung by a wasp and going into anaphylactic shock and dying, and he did. And she told her mother that.
Well, mine started out really well because I dreamed that my grandfather sent me a little white pony. I didn't know it was him. I told my parents today when I woke up, I had a dream and it's true. I'm going to have a little white pony with a red saddle and bridle. So I went and sat out in the driveway to wait. And I said, it's supposed to be here for lunch. And they were having lunch. And they said, it was just a dream. It doesn't matter. And I said, no, it's real. And my grandfather had sent me a little white pony. And the man drove up and he said, a little white pony for Julia Griffin. Is she here? And my parents were just like, and they pointed to me. And my father said, I don't guess you have a little red bridle and saddle up in the front of that truck with you. And he said, yes, sir, I do. How did you know that? And so then after that, of course, they listened to me.
That's pretty
Accurate.
emphatic.
But I was very close to my grandfather, and I'm pretty sure in my sleep, because I still went to bed at 4 at 8:30 or something. I picked up on all that happening. And he didn't tell my parents. He had wanted it to be a surprise.
How do you distinguish between your everyday conventional thinking and your psychic intuitions? How do you is there a different quality? Is there
If I'm absolutely right, I know it's visceral. I feel it through every part of my body. Then there are things that I think that may be right. Like I'm 90% or I'm 80%. So what I've learned with that is to say, okay, this may or may not be accurate. I'm going to put it over here and see if it repeats or see if it comes back with the really strong vibration and see if I've interpreted it correctly. And then I make myself forget about it. And at the appropriate time, I'll get a yes or a no on that.
Yeah, I always used to think about it when I was a kid in England. We used to have little transistor radios, they'd be in little, and
Yeah, they were so cute, weren't they?
Yeah, and they were in mine was in like a little yellow case, little yellow leather case with a little strap. And at night, under the covers, you could tune it in and you'd get that static and that noise, and then you tune in. And I always felt that psychic ability was like that you had to be willing to tune it in and to kind of feel your way in and get the signal. So when my kids were little, my husband, even though he's an engineer, I always had great interest in this too. Remote viewing. He was always very fascinated by remote viewing. It was actually something that we know that the Department of Defense, the military in both Russia and America were training people. In fact, there's that George Clooney film,
Right.
I Knew Stare at Goats or something. Anyway, when my kids were little, I got this mind lamp from Princeton. Princeton was doing a lot of psychic research. And you look at the lamp and you change the colors. You have to figure out how to predict or change the color of the lamp. It's like a lava lamp, but it changes. And what was interesting about it, and I said that to the kids because I wanted my kids to pay attention to different experiences and signals, to not just be sort of dumbed down into conventional reading of life.
Right.
And I used to sit them in front of it just as a game and say, see if you can change the color of the lamp. And what does it feel like? What's the feeling that you get when you're changing the lamp? And I think that that's what I love about people like you, Julia, that you pay attention and you to recognize those signals and that experience, and then shape it into something that you can communicate and that can come into the world, rather than, because if people just don't entertain it as a possibility, then they're not going to pick up on those subtle intuitive feelings or feelings of recognition or whatever the signals are that we get to tell us that something extra is coming through.
Well, I feel I have to stay vulnerable and I have to be open to emotions. When I've had acupuncture, they're always like, you're too emotional. Let's turn that down. I'm like, oh, I'm not coming back. I've got to have my emotions. It's okay for me if I laugh or I cry or I get upset or I'm joyous. And I think that as a safety thing, most people cut off their emotions or they just choose certain emotions that they want to feel.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of it.
You and I were talking before we came on about there's a book called The Cassandra Complex, and it goes back to Greek mythology. Cassandra was the daughter of the king of Troy, and she foresaw the Greeks coming
Right. In
in
the Iliad. Yeah.
in the Iliad, yeah. And she Agamemnon, I think, was her father. And no one would believe her.
Right.
I think Zeus had spit in her mouth and said, I give you the gift of prophecy, but no one will ever believe you. And they talk about medial women, women who are psychic, not being able to contain it and hold on to it until in fact, my book, Business Intelligence at Work, I talk about how women in the workplace are very intuitive. If you blurt out too quickly something that other people can't see or they're not willing to hear, it has a very detrimental effect. You have to hold on to that information, all of the pieces, and get to that point where the situation is ripe for them to hear it. And then you can skillfully begin talking about it. But I've always had a problem with that, with not blurting it out, needing
So
to be
what you
valid.
want, right.
Yeah.
So as soon as you get an intuition,
Yeah.
the temptation is to tell other people what you've gotten.
Yes.
So I don't do that because most of the time people are not ready to hear it.
Yeah.
So then I say to myself, is there an aspect of this I can share? Is there some way I can help them with their energy to go to a higher point so that when this happens, they'll know what to do? Or is it more appropriate for me to say nothing? And if I get the yes, like that visceral feeling, then I can, but that almost never happens. So what I'll say is, I know that you're probably going to go through a change in the next 6 to 8 months. Let's think about things that we can do to get your energy in a better place. Because if you're in a higher vibration or a better place, then it may not even happen.
Yeah. It takes a lot of they used to, in the Victorian times, they came up in psychiatry with the term hysteria.
Right.
And it literally, they believed that it was to do with a woman's womb wandering. It was like a wandering womb. It was that she couldn't hold her emotions properly, and she would get. And so there's sort of an element of that, but also comes with being undermined or denied or told that you're crazy, or there's a lot of sort of factors that go into that. But it's just very interesting that hysterical women were often very intuitive women who were sort of punished for knowing things that they shouldn't know, and then became afraid of it.
Oh, there's a very long history of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the greatest apartheids on the earth is what happened in Europe with women.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
witches.
Well, they killed whoever they thought was a witch.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the healing arts of, where I grew up in the north of England is I grew up with homeopathic medicine.
Lucky you.
And people really understanding that was our day-to-day go-to medicine. Red poultices and sulfur for the blood, and people really understood the healing power. They could point out dandelions and make dandelion tea and different herbs, and really understood the power of that. But that in and of itself was enough. That's some of the ways that they would recognize a witch.
I know.
Punish her for it. Yeah.
So I do think there is this movement that's going on right now because I've seen it happen to so many women. When they first step into their power, they're afraid that they're going to be killed or lose their families, because of course that happened in the past. But I keep saying this time the energy is different. We're all allowed to awaken. We're allowed to express these things.
Yeah. And I'm a great lover of the male energy too. And what you were talking about, the complementary aspects of the male and the female. And I try to do that in the book. I'm a woman, so I'm very interested in the feminine and intuition and the unique set of qualities and abilities that women have. But I think sometimes the mistake we make in modern feminism is trying to be more like a man and to think like a man and act like a man, and compete with a man, instead of in a very well-balanced relationship. The male and the female are very complementary. I find that in raising our kids, that we've just naturally my husband and I looked after, and sometimes he's actually more nurturing than I am. I don't have the market cornered on nurturing them. He was always the one to get them their haircuts and their doctor's appointments and all of that, and shopping. He was always, if we were out of stuff. So I try to cover that in the book too, that you get a strong sense of strong masculine qualities. So it's the yin and the yang of the making the paintings happen. And I can't say too much because I go away the book. But
I know, but we definitely need the balance.
Yeah, we need the balance. Yeah.
Both energies.
Yeah.
And the different interests and the different sensations of life. With either one, I think that you can become too polarized.
Yeah.
Like trying to be a man, you can lose your femininity. Trying to be too feminine, you can lose your strength.
Yeah. Because I think women are, it's too easy to, I think if you want to compete in business, which has historically been a sort of a men's world set up from men's rules, and you can do that. But I think sometimes women they give away they sort of neglect the power that they have to study, as a woman in business, I've always done very well with men. But I've done
like men.
I like men too. I really like men, my son, my husband, and there's an archetype, I think it's called the Atera, the woman who is the counselor and in my business role, I've been very successful sort of counseling, giving them my perspective. And they'll come and there's that level of trust. They'll say, what do you think? What do you think I should do? And I think any, woman who's in a relationship is used to her husband or partner coming home and really wanting the benefit of her intuition or her take on the situation.
And vice versa.
Vice versa. Yeah. But you giving that, I think for in a men who are, if there's a pecking order or, alpha male, it's difficult to be vulnerable sometimes. And I think just having a woman women have been great counselors throughout history. That's my only.
Yeah, but it's a fascinating book with so many different layers of energy that you've written. If you wanted people to walk away with just a couple feelings from it or realizations, what would those be?
To be curious and be creative. That your level of joy and well-being will expand to the extent that you're willing to move forward creatively in life and ask questions and find answers and be open. As little kids, our days are just filled with joy because it's constant discovery. Why? We don't know anything. We're just inquiring about everything. And there's a vivaciousness and there's a vitality and a spontaneity
and joy.
Which is actually the underlying ingredient of joy. And so, and love, I think in the book, the whole point of creating a visual gospel, Claire asks the monk, Grant, what will this new gospel say? And he says, well, Jesus left us with only 2 commandments. It doesn't matter who your spiritual master is. Like you said, it boils down to the same thing. He left us with 2 commandments: to love God, which is the force of the universe, creation itself, is to love God and to love one another. And if we do that, miracles will happen. Now, those are very simple, basic instructions, but seemingly impossible to carry out. And so that's the point of the book, that we can do all of this esoteric reading, but really what it's going to come down to is our ability to love God and to love ourselves and love one another. And the paintings are really, it's supposed to be a more direct expression of that message. So not to be corny, but I say this we're very divided and tribal and running on our anger and our adrenaline. I think to your point, to get to that higher vibration, what are some things that we have to think about? And hopefully in the book, the things that I'm inviting people to think about is going to raise their vibration and get them into that place. And we can all do our little part to take the heat down, calm the world down, and make it right for good things to happen.
Right. And that's a wonderful thought. So that is something that we can all do now instead of worrying about politics or what is going to happen next, is to move into that space. It reminds me, I used to write for an online magazine, and I was talking to an angel lady, and she was telling me all these things. And I said, well, what about loving yourself? And she said, Oh, Julia, she said, that's the hardest thing. When I asked my angels what I should do next, they said, love yourself. And I said, oh, that's really, really hard, but I'll try.
Yeah, it is hard. It is
Yeah.
hard. Yeah, I find that it's very easy to punish yourself or to find yourself lacking and to sort of chastise yourself to do better. And I always ask the question, like, if I loved myself in this moment instead of judging myself, what would it look like?
Mm-hmm.
It always feels a little bit wrong, like you're letting yourself off too easily, that we should constantly be under the whip of self-improvement. And
It's
so I think,
almost like there's a mirror that's not right that we're looking into.
yeah, yeah,
And I really think a lot of that is a filter or a screen of other people's thoughts and perceptions.
yeah,
Because think of how everybody changes how they look when they're really in love.
yeah,
Yeah. And so I try to say that if I were really like madly, truly in love, how would I look or feel? Not how do I feel now, but how would that transform me?
yeah. And even remember after 9/11, it was just so difficult and painful, and people were animated to be open and vulnerable and loving and kind. And then around Christmas time or certain holidays, you got that peace on earth and goodwill to man. You can walk around the streets and you can feel it. It's a vibrational energy because people had just put themselves into the mindset of, hey, it's Christmas and you want to have a good time and tip one another. And so it just shows you. I know sometimes that a few years ago, they get these big meditation. Remember, they get thousands of people meditating at the same
Yeah.
time to see if they could change the energy. So it would be
I,
great if we
I
had
had
a
a
day.
friend who actually did that in Washington, D.C., and they
Yeah.
meditated 8 hours a day. I don't remember if it was 5 or 7 days, but the crime in Washington, D.C. decreased by 50%. And she said that was just like, 80 people meditating all day. She said, what if all of us meditated for 10 minutes a day?
What if once a week we just had sort of an hour of power or a
Yeah.
like 15 minutes we all just agreed that we were going to meditate on a uplifting, wonderful thing. Just
Hmm.
everybody in the United, of course, not everybody would comply.
Yeah.
But I think there are enough like-minded people that everyone would get on the same wavelength, and it would be a great experiment.
I think so too, but I think just the fact that we can talk about it and people consciously recognize that that's important is such an incredible thing, because just as we're talking about it, I can feel people in the higher level of the collective responding to us like, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is wonderful. So we're coming to the end, and I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I know I can get your book on Amazon because I already did, but why don't you tell our listeners the name of your book again and where they can find it?
Yeah, the name of the book is The Angel Scroll. And if they go to my website, penelopeholt.com, you can read my blog and see the book trailer and link to Amazon. You can find the book pretty much anywhere that you buy your books. And I'd like to join. It's been a real joy to talk about the book because it's very solitary to write it.
Mhm.
And if anyone would like me to zoom into a book club, I love people like you did, Julia, reading it and then rereading it so that, to have those conversations and ask people questions. And I learn too, because you put something out into the world and someone takes something away from it that you hadn't intended. And that's always a bonus.
Well, that's the reward of teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a wonderful book. Everyone come and find it if you can. And you can see my website beneath my name, onetrueself.com. And you can sign up for my biweekly newsletter. We have classes. I talk about the energetic weather, meditation, and developing a more spiritual mind. So you can even send me a note, onetrueself@gmail.com, and I'll answer you if you have questions or want to know more. So namaste, everyone. I bow before the divine in you, and it was a great pleasure being with you.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening Radio with Julia Griffin to master a higher frequency for a new state of mind. Join us next time as Julia takes us deeper into the memory of the moments of light where transcendence and enlightenment emerge. The memory of the jewel of consciousness is always lived within you to tap into waves of energy and create huge changes by imagining the beauty of the vision and desires that are hidden in the heart. Learn to find your way back to nature, beauty, and your own heart, which holds the secrets of your existence and future. To discover more about Julia's adventures, animal communication, and the teachings she brings to every show, visit onetrueself.com. That's onetrueself.com. That's ONE, trueself.com.